Each week, we speak to Leith Van Onselen, Chief Economist at the MB Fund, MB Super, co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au, where we get our economic and financial commentary and at times political commentary. It's published each day, and it's well worth a look, macrobusiness.com.au. Leith Van Onselen is on the line. Good morning.
G'day, Luke. How are you?
Very well indeed, my friend. We despair over the loss of manufacturing, but you say, don't you, that the death of Australian industry is at hand, and your conclusion, am I right in saying, is that we simply have to abandon net zero?
That's right, mate. We've got to use what we've already got. Now, look, I'll just say from the outset, I don't particularly care what form of energy we take, and if renewables were in fact the cheapest and could provide us with reliable and the cheapest electricity, I'd be all for them, 100%. But the reality of the situation is Australia's manufacturing industry is dying. Right? We've got the smallest manufacturing share in the advanced world. It's only about 5% of the economy. We've seen major manufacturers close down over recent years. We lost our last plastics manufacturer, we lost fertiliser makers, lost our last industrial architectural glass maker, this month.
Yep.
And we've just seen the whole industry shrink. And one of the main reasons why it's shrinking is because Australia has given itself incredibly high energy prices, which we don't need to, given that we're the second biggest gas exporter in the world and the biggest coal exporter. Now, so basically today I want to explain why Australia needs to abandon its net zero. So the Albanese government set an unrealistic target of having 82% of Australia's electricity generated by renewables by 2030. So that's only 5 years away. And to meet this target, reliable baseload coal-fired generation that's been powering the nation for generations will need to close. And hundreds of billions of dollars will need to be spent on building out an intermittent renewable energy network. Now, Australia shut down about 10 coal-fired generators in the last decade or so. We've already reduced our coal consumption by 1/3 since 2007. And this has been replaced by a 147% increase in renewable generation and 34% increase in gas. Now, gas used to power electricity. Now, I won't go into the gas stuff because I talked about that ad nauseum the last few weeks, but the reduction in coal-fired generation has contributed to the increase in power costs. It's obviously not everything. The gas is another problem as well. And it's also reduced the reliability of the electricity system. Now, renewables, by their nature, are inherently unreliable because they depend on the weather, which is uncontrollable. So solar is only useful when the sun's out, which is, not even half the day. And if you have cloudy days, winter, all that sort of stuff, it's not very good. Wind turbines are only useful, obviously, when the wind blows. So renewables, by their nature, require very costly storage, like pumped hydro and batteries and all this other stuff to try and store its energy. And even then, they don't store it for that long. And then we obviously need backup from hydrocarbon power. So I'm talking mostly gas. And the cost of building the renewable system is likely to top, $600 billion, which is going to get added to our power bills and or our taxes. And just last month, Moody's projected that the building out of renewables, this is based off very conservative numbers, which, unrealistically low numbers to be quite frank. But that alone will add 20 to 30% to retail power bills after inflation. So that's accounting for inflation in real terms over the next decade. And Infrastructure Victoria released modelling this month, and that warned that power costs are going to double over the next decade as Victoria shuts down its coal-fired generators. And you can see that, if you extrapolate that across the country, it's going to be a similar story. Now, the reason why I think we should just keep burning our coal is not because I, hate the environment or the planet or anything. It's because the three largest emitters in the world, China, the United States, and India, those three countries alone account for more than half of the world's carbon emissions. And all three countries have committed to burning more coal. So China is by far the world's largest producer of coal. So it has more coal mines than anywhere else. It's the largest importer, which it gets mostly from us, and it's the largest user of coal. It burns 30% more coal than the rest of the world combined. Its emissions are growing at a breakneck pace, almost going upwards. China alone accounts for nearly 1/3 of the world's carbon emissions. And in the decade of 2024, China's coal consumption rose by just over 50%. So China's just ramped up its coal massively. It's committed to continuing to do so. Every quarter, the Chinese government issues new permits for new coal mines and new coal-fired generation. So China's going hog wild. The same story in India. India's coal-fired electricity generation, so India's the second biggest coal user, that hit a record high last year. And India's increased its coal use by 73% over the last decade. And the Indian government has ordered basically to keep ramping up coal production, coal use, etc., and coal-fired generation. So India's increasing it. And then just this week, we saw President Trump came out and he did a declaration saying that America's going to reverse its, renewables push and it's going to start using more coal as well. So we've got the three biggest emitters that account for more than, half the world's carbon emissions. China and India are driving the world's carbon emissions because they're the ones who are keep increasing as the advanced world has been cutting back, mostly through cutting back the coal use. And just these three nations alone have, according to Statista, last year had 1,650 coal-fired generators, which all three countries have committed to increase at the same time as Australia's 18. So it's like, well, how is it that Australia exports 6 times more coal than it uses, right? But we're not allowed to use that coal. Common sense would tell you that it makes sense to use more of it domestically to give ourselves cheap power and cheap reliable power, and maybe export a bit less of it. Because the world would be no worse off if we did that, because we're selling literally 6 times more coal. We're exporting mostly to China to burn rather than just using it ourselves. And here's a ridiculous thing. Since Australia's emissions peaked in 2008, so we've actually cut our emissions since 2008, China's added 94 times that amount of emissions. So, what sense is there in Australia, exporting 6 times more coal than it uses, exporting around 80% of its gas, most of which goes to China, and denying itself energy security and cheap energy just so we can export energy security to China and other nations at the same time as the three largest emitters, China, India, and the US, have committed to burn more coal. To me, it makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Did you just say there that our reduction in emissions since 2007, 2008, that China burns 94 times what we've reduced?
Well, no. So China's emissions have increased by 94 times what Australia has reduced since 2008, which just tells you how futile it is. And in fact, China alone has accounted for nearly 2/3 of the rise in the world's emissions since 2000. So, China's is nearly 1/3 of the world's carbon emissions, like 31.5%. And if you actually plot it, and I'll plot it on macrobusiness.com.au, but if you go to Our World in Data, so everyone who listens to this who wants to check my data, go to Our World in Data, go to CO2 emissions and put China, India, the United States, and Australia. And you'll see Australia is basically hugging the axis at the bottom. Like we're almost a rounding error. China just blows everyone else out of the water. Its emissions are going up at almost a straight line. So it's ramping emissions like you would not believe. The America, to its credit, has cut its emissions because it's substituted coal for gas. But Trump has said that he wants to burn more coal now. So so China's the biggest emitter. US is number 2. India is number 3, but it's rising quickly. And China and India have already said they're going to ramp up coal. Now America said they're going to ramp up coal at the same time as we're saying we're going to shut down all our coal. Yeah. While we're literally exporting 6 times as much coal, basically most of which goes to China, but denying ourselves the opportunity to burn that coal. This makes no sense to me. And all we're doing is we're driving up energy prices. We're sending our manufacturing bust. We're going to give ourselves structurally higher inflation, cost of living pressures. And you got to say for what? Like we have so much, coal, so much gas. We've also got so much uranium. If we want to go down the nuclear route down the track, we should be an energy superpower and have some of the cheapest energy prices in the world. But we're denying ourselves that for what? It makes no sense. And all we're going to end up is a worse economy. Yeah, and manufacturing would still exist because we'd have all those advantages.
Listening to you and reading what you published this week. See, this is where I think the debate becomes confused. You look at China, 1,161 coal-fired power plants, so that's 1,161. India, 285. US, 204. Indonesia, 90. I could keep going. Russia, 65. Germany, 48. Australia, 18. And what we're saying here is we don't want to make 118. 18 could become 22.
22, yeah.
And, and with cleaner technology, it would be better. It could potentially be better than 6 of the old ones. But we've so demonised this resource that we happily send around the world that if you actually had a coal-fired power plant, you wouldn't do anything to it to keep it modern or efficient or the like, because you know that there is a date stamp with the end of service written on it. So what are you going to do? Of course, it's going to break down.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, a coal-fired generator, we could either refurbish the ones we've got, or we could build new ones at the same place where the current ones already stand. We've got heaps of land there because the transmission lines and everything are already built, and they wouldn't be that expensive to build. But it's technology that's existed forever. Even Australia has experience in that technology, and it'll last us another 50 to 80 years, whatever, or probably more if we put more investment into it. But how many times, let's just, play a thought experiment here. Let's say we build out these renewables and we put in batteries. How many times do you think our batteries are going to have to be replaced over that 50-year period? I mean, everyone here's got phones. We've all got battery appliances. The batteries degrade. So, is that what they're talking about when they say renewables? We're going to have to keep renewing these things? It's just insane. Like the whole point here is I'm a pragmatist, right?
Yep.
So I'm trying to be practical here. I'm not trying to demonise renewables, or I'm not trying to be a cheerleader for either. But the fact is, we've got to look at the facts here. The 3 largest emitters in the world that account for more than half of the world's emissions, and China and India in particular are the ones growing the world's emissions. So they keep increasing them at an alarming rate. They've all said they're going to have more coal, and they're going to burn more coal, and they're going to have more coal-fired electricity generation. What sense is it in a country like Australia that's like 1% of the world's carbon emissions, a rounding error, to say, you know what, we're going to be net zero heroes. We're going to shut down all our baseload power and spend $500 billion on renewables just to save the planet, when we're not going to save the planet because the big players are doing the opposite and they're not playing by the same rules. Like, why are we shooting ourselves in the foot? Because all we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up shutting down all our manufacturing. It's all going to move to China. We're going to have a worse economy.
Yep.
And for what?
Yep. And, the final point to make is this, that there are those within the political class, and so let me make this somewhat political, who will say, we could lead the world. They'll see what Australia's done and they'll follow. Yeah, how's that going out for you? US, emissions up. China, emissions up. India, emissions up. Coal consumption up. So no one's looking at Australia and saying, oh, look at the Aussies, we want to be just like them. Nobody. It's a convenient argument. In fact, Leith, I'm convinced there are people with a great vested interest in renewable, I'll say, subsidies, that they've become so entrenched that it's not just a matter of solving the world's climate problem, if you believe there is a world climate problem. It's all about getting a return via subsidies on their investment. Is that too harsh?
100%. No, 100%. It's a massive rent-seeking industry around this now. It is unbelievable. And look, I would love for the world to, have lower carbon emissions, but we've got to be practical here. The fact of the matter is the big players aren't playing by the same rules. So why should you shoot yourself in the foot? And it just makes, again, mate, I'll just say, we export 80% of our gas, or just over 80% of our gas across East and West Coast, and we export orders of magnitude many times more coal than we actually burn domestically. So how about we just use a bit more of it ourselves and maybe export a little bit less of it and give ourselves cheap energy and energy security? And mate, that just seems like common sense.
It does to me too. Macrobusiness.com.au. Good on you, mate. Great to chat.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.
Thank you. Leith Van Onselen.